I was in the most rugged region of South Dakota that I had ever been in, to the point that I had zero cell phone service, and I was the only vehicle on the road. Also, the sun was going down in a hurry. It had already been a crappy week, and predictably enough, it happened that my car quit. I was losing speed, and I didn't know why. Then, I realized that the car wasn't even running, and I was coasting. Every light on the dashboard was on, and we all know what happens and what it means that it's going to cost a pretty penny. A glance under the hood showed that it was my timing belt. Not only had it come loose, it decided to take a few gears along with it. With no vehicle and no phone service, the only thing I could do was wait for someone else to come that way, and it sure seemed to be a lonely road. So I did the best thing that I could, and I sat and I waited. It wasn't as cold out as it could have been, so I wasn't afraid of freezing to death. Apparently I dozed off, because I awoke to sudden movement outside my car. I had expected to see the shape of an officer or a Good Samaritan, but instead, I saw the bulky outline of something that clearly wasn't human, but it had just enough human characteristics in its face to make me afraid. It loomed over my vehicle and looked at me with eyes that were analytical, critical, and not the least bit friendly. They bore curiosity, but not friendliness. It could have been a gorilla if it had not been walking with such an upright gait. It must have wanted more of a reaction out of me, so it put one gigantic paw on the hood of the car and pressed down. And I swear, I felt the bumper tap the ground. The strength of the thing must have been immense. I wasn't frozen, but I was definitely frozen then. And that seemed to be a dissatisfactory reaction. So instead of pressing on the hood of the car, it slammed its fist down on it, and the metal dented just like aluminum foil. I screamed. The Bigfoot, or whatever it was, bared its teeth and bounced. I presumed that it was happy, or it was aggressive, but I couldn't tell. It then proceeded to tear a tire off the car with its bare hands. The ambiguity was driving me crazy. I didn't know if I was going to die as either Emil or a ragdoll, and I assumed that Emil would die faster. Very suddenly, the thing gave off a loud whoop and ran off. And a few seconds later, another motorist appeared and pulled over just ahead of my car. He asked me if I was all right, and if my friend that ran off needed any help. I let him know that that was not my friend at all, and that I nearly just lost my life. I tried not to tell him too much, so that he wouldn't think I was nuts and would continue to assist me. So I'm sharing my story with you. I don't know if I was going to be lunch, if I was going to be a chew toy for a furry, overpowered kid. Any time now when I hear stories about Bigfoot, and how it was this gentle and inquisitive being, I pretty much roll my eyes. I feel like I know their true nature now. I spent my early years in college and working with little or no sleep, so that I could give my family the kind of life that I felt they deserved. I had managed to play my cards just right, and I got a really good house that sat on 4 or 5 acres of mostly untouched woods. The house in the immediate yard was the only developed part of the entire property. The rest was reserved and left alone, just in case whoever bought the house wanted to do some hunting. Although I was no hunter. I just wanted my family to grow up and live without having to worry about the dangers associated with urban living. I eventually had 2 kids, and I built them a treehouse deep in the woods. And it wasn't just any small treehouse. It was big. I chose an oak tree that had been there for centuries and was still alive. And this was a treehouse that I had constructed 2 or 3 rooms, so there's plenty of room for growth in case we had more. Well, one day, when I came home from work, both of my kids ran up to me, saying that somebody was in their treehouse and wasn't coming out, and the intruder was making strange noises. So, as any concerned parent, I took the chance that they were telling me the truth, and I went out into the woods. It was just as it had hit the tree line that I could hear the strange sounds that my children must have heard. They did sound animalistic, grunting and barking. They didn't sound like the noises any person would make. I found the treehouse, and it suddenly had a very ominous feel to it, like something just wasn't right. Even though it was still daylight out, the inside seemed awfully dark. I reflected on the wisdom of investing in something like a rifle, and I had no such thing. I could have thrown rocks if I wanted to, but that wouldn't accomplish anything at that point. I called out to whoever was up there, and I told them that they were not only on private property, they were inside my kids' treehouse, and I would really appreciate it if they left. Not surprisingly, there was no answer. Nothing but silence. There's an open window on each side, and I picked one and did the most productive thing at the time I could think of. I threw a rock just to see if I would get a response. A loud roar came from inside. It was the roar of an angry animal. Something burst through the roofing of the treehouse. The closest thing I can come to describing it was a juvenile Bigfoot. It was like an average gorilla, but bigger. But it was nowhere near big enough as some of the stories that I've heard on your channel. Kind of convenient that I'm a listener. It had rusty brown fur, and it had the rock that I had thrown at its hand, and it threw the rock back at me. I must admit, it was quite the marksman. If I was a half a second slower, it would have gotten me right in the head. It lifted itself up into a higher limb of the tree and swung to another tree, just like a monkey, and then to another, and it was gone. I keep trying to tell myself that it was just a large monkey, but it was way too big to be any species of ordinary monkey. Not to mention we're in North America. Not unless there's any primates of the size of an orangutan on steroids. Only unlike orangutan, all the muscle was in the arms and the shoulders and the chest, instead of the stomach. So, I guess I'm passing this on as a Bigfoot story, and if you want to believe me, that's fine. If not, that's fine too. But me and my kids stand by what we saw that day. Very, very strange. I like to camp and hike alone. I'm the eldest of 5 siblings, and for various reasons, we all still live at home. Hiking and camping out for the night is a relatively inexpensive way of getting some cheap peace. I never travel too far from home, but there are plenty, and woods and parklands that aren't too long of a drive away. I had a couple of days off work, so I decided to head a little further afield and camp out for 2 nights in some forest that I had never been to before. I set up my tent like normal, having seen nobody around, and was happy to leave it there for a bit, whilst I went off for a hike and exploring. I'm not stupid. I didn't leave any open food for animals to smell, and I had nothing expensive or valuable with me. I had my truck keys, wallet, cell phone, although 0 coverage. I headed back after a few hours and was shocked to see the entire site ripped in pieces. The tent was no more, and what belongings I'd left were strewn about and smashed. All the food was ripped open, most of it all over the floor and gone. I couldn't believe it. I'd sprayed bear repellent over the fabric of the tent. Whatever had done this was strong, and was clearly no bear. I could see claw marks and what looked like huge teeth marks in some of the food. There was also a lingering stank, and a massive pile of steaming feces next to what had been my sleeping bag. There was also one more piece of evidence. One solid, solitary footprint. It was ginormous, bigger than any animal should have been. I just stood there, staring at the side of my poor tent, when something hits me on the back. It stung, so I turned around to see what was going on. That's when I was hot a few more times, each one stinging, and when I looked down, they were rocks. Somebody was throwing little stones at me. First, my tent was ripped to shreds, and now this. At this point, I was beginning to think I must be pranked. There's no way this could be an animal. This was a person. Wrong. I saw movement behind the trees, and in that moment, I got to see what creature had sharp enough claws and teeth to do that kind of damage and carnage, and enough intelligence to throw stuff at me that had big enough feet to leave a print. I have no doubt in my mind that what I saw was a Bigfoot. This thing was huge, easily around 8 feet, at least, and built like King Kong himself. And that was sorta what it looked like, except it had a more upright kind of body, and a giant hairy person with an ape-like face, and a very intelligent quality to its eyes. Also, a very mean expression. I could tell it didn't want me there, and I felt like the tent was my first warning. I didn't want to hang around and find out if I should get another warning. There was nothing left to salvage, so I turned and walked back to my truck really slow, just in case this thing decided to bluff charge me, or worse. I headed straight to a motel with a minibar and stayed there for 2 nights instead, and washed all my memories and troubles away. I always thought stories about such things like Bigfoot were just that. Stories. That those creatures were just too fantastical to be real. Until the day I think I saw one. It wasn't a close encounter, and of course, like 99% of all other reported sightings, I didn't have my phone right there to shoot what I was seeing. And since I was driving and traveling at a decent speed, I only saw it for less than 30 seconds. Maybe. I was on the way to see friends and running late, so I decided to take a shortcut through the roads. I didn't use this route often because it's so barren out there, and if I was to break down, I'd be screwed with no reception. Plus, there are these huge tree canopies, so it makes it really dark, and it feels kinda creepy, just being so dense into the woods. And it always smells bad, like a mixture between the town dump and a sewage plant. So gross. I was already on the edge as I was driving through the area, and when I caught sight of something following along the passenger's side, but in the trees, I prayed to God they just had some really big deer out here. But of course, I knew it wasn't a deer. My first thought when I saw the size and shape of my stalker was that it was a bear. But that's when I realized it was even bigger than a bear. Both the height and the stature were wrong. It looked like it was covered from head to toe in really dark hair, except maybe the face. But I could only see it in profile. It never turned to face me or look at me. And the smell had massively intensified too, and I had put one hand over my mouth just to keep from gagging. This huge thing that looked a bit like a bear or an ape was just running alongside the car, keeping up with my speed, and then appeared at some point to randomly vanish. I floored it to my friends, rushing into her house, all out of breath, told them what had happened, and they believed me. They were all wide-eyed and told me I must have seen the SASQUATCH. I don't care how late I am anytime now. I will never drive through that section of woods again.